Okay. Um, Welcome everyone to this edition of Kubevela's community call. Um, all right, let's start with some of the updates that we have. And we can start with the issue. I can share the issue that you guys have created. Uh, you guys able to see my screen?
Yep. Yes.
All right. So the topics. The first topic that we have is KubeCon NA. I think I can give an update, and Jerome, please feel free to fill in. So we had a great KubeCon NA visibility for Kubevela. There were two things that happened. One was we had a talk. Jerome and I gave a talk about democratizing platforms using Kubevela and Crossplane, etc. We can share the details of that talk once it's available on YouTube again on our Kubevela channel. But the second thing, what we had greater success was with our project pavilion for Kubevela, and probably one of the busiest and trafficked area in that project pavilion as a whole. Met a lot of existing folks who were using Kubevela, and also met some of the initial people who set up Kubevela and OAM like Ryan Zhang, etc. And it was enlightening. We saw people who were using Kubevela quite to a good extent, but they weren't aware of the changes that have been going in recently. So this was a great way to touch and base with them, as well as potentially new folks from many companies. Can't not naming all of them, but we had people from Google, AWS, and Capital One, etc. interested. Um, in general, it was a great input and great amount of eyeballs for Kubevela as a whole. Jerome, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I think you cover it all. But yeah, no, it was a very good event, and as you said, met a lot of people, bring a lot of energy to the project, and it was very interesting to see the interest really around the project. Yeah, the booth was always busy, so it was really good.
Awesome. All right, let's go to the technical stuff. Released 1.10.5. Brian.
Just really quickly on KubeCon before we move on.
Yeah.
Don't suppose you managed to like scope out some of the features that the users are actually using or looking for, or
That's a very good question. So with the people I interacted with, most of them were already in awe of what feature set that we have. Those were like new people who have not been used to Kubevela, but the people who are used to Kubevela asked questions about things like component versioning. I said it's already there. They talked about health status reconciliation. I said that's also already there. Those are the two big things that came in as, hey, have you guys fixed these things? And so those two were big requirements that came in, and both of them we've had released them for a little bit of time. So
awesome.
I think that helped. So it was
Cool.
good. I think I can't remember the third or fourth, but when they asked, I said done, 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 and done. So
And
yeah.
any idea, because I'm always kind of curious about this, like whether they're using the multi-clustering or whether they use it similar to our own use of kind of single cluster multi-installations.
Uh, as far as so the only one company that was using it largely was Comcast, and there was and they are I don't know the exact setup of how it's working, but I believe it is a single cluster.
Okay, got it. Cool. Okay, so the issue. So yeah, we released 110.5, which was kind of a quick patch fix to 110.4. So some background, there was a little bit of internal back and forth as to whether this 110.4 should have been 110.4 or if it should have been 111. because there was a few substantial features in there. One of which was the native Q syntax for the health field.
Hmm.
We did pretty extensive backwards compatibility checking on the conversion from native queue into the stringified queue, and everything was good. We didn't account for imports within the queue strings, which was incompatible. So that caused a slight break and change for very, very few definitions. None of our internal ones or none of the out of the box Kubevela definitions use imports. But one user reported an issue. So obviously they are using string joins within their definite health checks. So that broke things. So we issued a quick fix patch. It's unfortunate. We've kind of had to mark 110.4 as not suitable for production. 110.5 is the recommended version you should upgrade to. 110.3 is perfectly safe, and the upgrade path from 110.3 or previous versions is to 110.5. Um, but yeah, the team was pretty quick to get that turned around. And we also included a slight security fix for the new component ORBAC, which allowed you to bypass if you had namespace admin, and you could bypass some of the restrictions. So that's now patched as well. Um,
Did we add any tests so that, and I'm guessing that our test did not fail in 110.4 because none of the internal queue
yeah,
templates were actually using imports, correct?
exactly. Yeah. So now we have tests with both imports and the use of packages, which was similar to imports.
Okay,
But now tests for both of them, so we'll catch it in the future.
perfect.
The guys have added more testing around the namespace issue as well for ORBAC.
Sounds good. Cool.
Um, this kind of leads into future releases where we've had kind of internal discussions on this, and in future, any features and any of these scheduled releases, the proposal is that they will always be minor releases, so 111, 112, 113, etc. And we will kind of more strictly subscribe to Semver so that the patch releases are, held for actual patches. So no changes should go out in those patch releases. It should purely be bug fixes. Um,
No feature changes. So the
no feature
patch
changes
release would be
whatsoever.
like security fixes or
Yeah,
minor fixes that don't change any functionality, correct?
exactly. Yeah, absolutely no functionality changes. So patch releases are bug fixes and security fixes, etc. Minor releases will contain any functionality. Uh, the proposal is for 3 to 4 of these scheduled releases or minor releases per year. Gautam, if he's on the call, has a roadmap which he can probably go through, and I'll outline those 3 or 4 releases broken down over the different quarters. And then we are also looking at revamping the entire release process to kind of map it out better because we want to make sure we're releasing workflow, PKG, and some of these other child repositories in line with Kubevela to keep everything in sync. Um, and then for any developers listening in, we will make more use of the backporting functionality. So when you are developing into the current release, you can label your pull request as a backport into previous versions. So if you are submitting a bug fix to the current release, you can also backport it into previous versions. So for example, if we are developing against 111 at the moment, you can backport to 110 and those bug fixes will become available in the 110 release branch. And then
Yep.
we can simultaneously release both a scheduled release and a bug fix for prior versions. So
Yeah.
that'll all.
I believe there's a pipeline for that, right? For
Yes,
backporting.
yeah, yeah. So as soon as you label your pull request as backport, there's a bot running that will, on merge to main, backport it into the relevant release branches. We just need to be
Cool.
careful to make sure we're creating those release branches because that wasn't happening for some of the more recent releases. So again, that's one of the things we're factoring into this new release checklist before we release.
Cool. And this is all in line with the existing documentation that we have around releases for Kubela, correct?
Yeah, I don't think there's detailed information out there for like the likes of backporting and stuff. So we do need to get that into the developer guides.
Okay, I believe
Yeah,
it's mentioned in somewhere in the docs, but let me check it out.
yeah, maybe, but it's definitely an area we should look at more
Yeah,
as developers and kind of enhance. Yeah.
and I think we should write it out so that everybody who comes in as a as a as a developer into Kubevela is able to use those guides.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. All right, now the most exciting part, new features.
Yeah, so we've three. Vishal is working on the post dispatch, which started as a bug fix, but it's actually quite an involved change. So he can go through that. I'm going to structure this, if it's okay, that I'm going to take compositions first because I have that branch running and it's handy
Okay, I'm going to
Vishal can
stop
take,
sharing. Go ahead.
yeah, Vishal takes the middle, and then I'll get my next demo ready while he is demoing, and then I'll do.
Sounds good. But before you start, please state the problem statement and then what we're doing.
Yeah, of course. So, the problem is that components in their current format are very atomic. You create, we have out of the box components like web service.
Mhm.
A web service has pretty powerful logic in there for provisioning, a deployment and a service and exposing it and all of that, all those requirements. But it's very, very generic. And essentially, a developer consuming the web service can use it as they see fit. They can size their service as they see fit. They can, expose whatever ports they want. It's very, very open to interpretation. And obviously for an organization of any, considerable size, we want to lock down the governance and expose more targeted versions of those components. And currently, the only good means to do so is to essentially copy the existing web service component and then make changes to it. And then if you needed an additional, maybe subset of that functionality, you would have to create another copy and then maintain that. And if you go through, different kind of user sets, you may have end up with many, many different versions of components that are all very similar to each other, but with minor deviations, and they all need to be maintained and updated, etc., as features become available. Um, so yeah, there's an awful lot of repetitive coding for an organization of any size. And then we've also got an issue where, depending on your audience, you may want to have, that is very pertinent to us, you may want to have an internal versus an external version of component, where internal is used by our internal platform teams, the external version is used by the consumers of our platform or the end users or tenants. Um, and currently, you would have to have two copies of those compositions, or sorry, of those components, or maintain an awful lot of logic within a single component to account for all the different use cases. And logic can get quite cumbersome in Q. I think Q is very good at templating, but once it gets to a certain level of complexity, it gets very, very difficult to maintain. So we kind of took this requirement, fleshed it out, and there seems to be a good amount of interest in this. We opened the feature issue yesterday, and a good few members of the community have already ticked it up, so that's good. Um, but essentially, the proposal is to support a level of. I started with the word composition. I think composition implies a level of orchestration that this won't offer, but it's more of a concept of layering your components. So you should be able to have a base component, and then that base component should be able to be extended without repeating the logic. So in this case, in the demo, we will have the standard web service base component. And using ORBAC, you would be able to now lock that component down and say, hey, users are no longer allowed to use the web service component, but we're going to expose a Nova service component, to use our own internal terms. And that Nova service component should provide a limited subset of the parameters, and then pass those parameters to the web service base component in a kind of standardized, governed fashion. So essentially, we're still using the web service logic, but we're using it through a kind of pass-through layer that is greatly simplified. And you should be able to extend that through any number of layers. You know, you should be able to say, hey, we need to have a web app component, and then we may have like a simple web app component or an external web app component versus an internal web app component. And the concept being that you can kind of stack and layer your components and reuse the logic, or you make, have a component that groups two other components together. So if you're creating a web app, you may say, hey, I want the web service component and the database component, and I want to wrap the two up and provision them at the same time. Um,
Quick
the idea
question,
being,
Brian. So is this
yeah.
more like inheritance or than composition?
Yeah, it's not really composition. I mean, composition
Yeah,
implies
multi.
orchestration of
Yeah,
the two. You know, if you have a component that says, "Hey, I want a web service and a database," it's not going to intelligently wait for the database to provision before the web service.
right.
That's more of a task for something like, Crossplane or Crow.
Yeah,
But what this will do is let you bundle two components together. So you are technically composing, but I think in, software engineering, compositions typically will be coupled with orchestration. So we're not doing
yeah,
the orchestration part, we're just doing the layering and bundling part.
sure. So when we say layering, a layer is still one component, or can I have two as part of this Nova service component that you're creating? Can it inherit from two other components, like from
Yes.
maybe? Okay,
Yeah, you'll see the way it's initially designed, it's very, very flexible in how you compose things. Or layer things. And I'm going to try and use the word layer from now on. You'll see composition references, but I'm going to try and start using the terminology of layering because
sure.
I don't want people to be misled that this is going to, have dependencies between the groups, components, etc. I think if you
Okay,
get into that layer of complexity, there are better tools to utilize that are more specialized and will do that for you.
okay, go ahead.
Okay, so what we've kind of arrived at is this concept that if we simply hook into the QX layer, we can expose QX functions within our components now, and we can use this QX functionality to expose functions that essentially let you render another component from within a component. So in this case, I'm in the Nova service.q. Um, and I want Nova service to essentially wrap the existing web service. But I want to define my own parameters. So rather than accepting like values for CPU and memory, etc., I'm just going to say, hey, I want this to be really simple for my users. I want you to give me a size from small up to XL. I'll determine based on that size, what memory and CPU you should get. I'm not going to leave it to be unbounded like the web service component, but I'm going to offer you some level of flexibility. And I'm going to ask you for a few additional parameters, but not too many. And then I'm going to default the rest and pass through to the web service exactly what I, based on your parameters, think this web service component should be rendered like. You can do that simply by just saying, hey, I want to do a def.render component. You give it the component you're looking to render within this new component, and then you just pass the properties in the same way you would from an application definition. Behind the scenes, render component will go off to QX. It will call the Go code that, implements this render component function. That will grab the compiler context and the current compiler, and there's a few other behind the scenes changes to make this possible, but essentially we have to maintain a compiler context and a queue context that is persistent throughout this layering. Once we do that, essentially if discovers the definition for this. We don't support versions or anything yet, but we'll get that in obviously if we're going this direction. And it'll reassemble the template and render the new definition from within this definition. Is that making sense so far? I know it's a lot of.
No, I think it is making sense. So what I would do is, let's say I have a component that is that I want to abstract on top of web service and a trait to that web service, I could still apply the same.
Yes, exactly.
So, and
Mm.
if I have two components I want to abstract, so this becomes, at that point, it becomes composition.
Um, it does
Because the
become
Nova
complicated.
service, I want to use web service and I don't know, a database. Not saying that we have to use that for orchestration, but I could essentially like
Yes, you could.
render
Yeah,
two components at the same time from this abstracted component, or from this
exactly.
composed
Yeah,
component.
you can do an unlimited number of these
Yeah.
def.render components from within this component, and then yes, it is composing to an extent, but it won't have the orchestration part. So if the database has to come up before the web service, you need to use different mechanisms for that because components are just rendered and dispatched. Uh,
Right.
they, they
So
don't distinguish the individual
yeah.
resources within a component.
The other question is instead of just the definition, I think you might want to also pin a version because let's say we release a new version of Kubevela and let's say the web service component changes and if
Yeah,
consumers take it downstream, then it could affect their composed
yeah, no,
web service.
100% we need versions. Again, this is just a light POC to make sure that the actual theory works, which it does.
Perfect.
Uh, the guys that need to develop it further, it needs to support versions and a few other things. Versions and revisions should be possible in here.
Yep.
And yeah, it should be consistent with how you would version or specify version within the application parameters, etc.
Right. And then we have to make sure that when we do upgrade Kubevela, it doesn't erase the old versions of new components that come in from the newer version of Kubevela.
Yes. At the moment, the base definitions within Kubevela itself are essentially unversioned. It
Yep.
just takes whatever the current version of Kubevela is. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think we'll have to make sure that there is maintaining of that or enough error messages that would show in case there's a mismatch.
Yeah. And I think we should follow some principles in terms of breaking change as well. If the web service component itself did change significantly, there should be a V2 of that web service. Because currently,
Yeah.
never mind this composition functionality, if a user is consuming web service in a certain fashion between releases and the web service API changes considerably, it would break irrespective of this.
Agreed. I think there's a lot more coordination in that and documentation that we'll have to add and guardrails around, what could potentially break. But this is great. This is awesome.
Yeah, so on top of this then, so this is all well and good, but we also want to be able to reuse the health logic because it's great that I can, say, hey, I want a web service, but web service implements pretty robust health checks. And I lose that context in my new component because I have to now re-specify health. So we have managed to rig it so that behind the scenes, it will actually add to the context as you use these render component functions. And within the health status of my child component, I can refer to the original component's health status, and it'll calculate the health status for each of the compositions, and then roll that up into the health status of the active component. So essentially, I can basically say, hey, if the web service was considered healthy, then I'm going to consider this healthy, and I can retrieve the status messages, and I can retrieve the details, etc., from the compositions, and that will layer appropriately. No matter how many layers you will have a composition entry for the relevant layer of that composition.
And
Um,
if there are multiple components within this component that is erroring out in the layers, then I can bubble up all of them.
exactly, yeah.
So is it a map? Is details a map?
Details is a map. Details we added recently,
Yep.
in the 1.10.4 release, and details lets you essentially add a string map of any details from your context.
Awesome.
This is
Awesome.
added. You can capture like I don't know the ARN of a provisioned AWS resource in here, etc., so that it's easier for the user to discover, without going to the managed resource or having to dig around Kubernetes. They can just see particular details about their application up front. And it's designed to be a little bit more flexible than the custom status message field, which can only give you a single string.
Cool. Anybody else
Um,
have any other questions?
So there will be an overall status and a list of detail about the status. Even if it's ready, you will get all the detail about, yeah, it could be a list of error and or something like that. And then if there is an error, you will have the error of the different layers, correct?
yeah, so I can actually bring this app up just to show you. So this is the Nova Service app. It's consuming the Nova Service twice. So there's a test small and a test large. And then if I go into Canines, you can see that it's brought my new Nova service up. I will have two deployments, one for the small, one for the small, one for the large. So test small, test large. And then if I go back to my application, within this, you will have that status map showing up. So you'll see service details, and I'm getting the composition name and the composition health as part of my service details here. And they are coming from this details map. But I can reflect anything in here. So again, if you're provisioning an AWS resource, you can capture the ARN. If you're provisioning a deployment, I could capture the number of running replicas, etc. But essentially anything that can be captured as a string, you can grab it from the context and display it here. And this is implemented in 1.10.4 just to enhance your ability to triage and diagnose issues within your application.
Cool.
Um, we do need to figure out a few issues. So obviously each component has output, a singular output, and then many outputs. Um, when you're composing, it gets a bit hard to distinguish which one should be the main output and which one should be outputs, and you'll have to remap it, etc. So I have some concepts I'll work through with the team as to how we can kind of solve that. And it does mean that depending on what way you map things within your composition, this this health status may refer to things that are not present in your composition, which means the health will kind of error out. So for very simple use cases where it's a straight pass through, this will always work. For complex compositions, it'll be left to the developer to implement the health policies in a manner that is kind of reusable across the layers.
All right.
And that,
I think we have still work, and in the interest of time, do we want to move forward?
yep. So I'll give it to Vishal.
Vishal, you can
Let
start
me
with the problem statement.
so let me share the screen first. So this is an investment over the stages of trade. So basically, I'll just continue with the different stages. So basically, in trade we have three stages. That is like pre, default, and post. So basically, these are to control where the when the trade will get applied. It is before the component, the workload which will be created using by the component. Is it before or is it parallel with the component, or is once the component has been deployed, and then you can apply the post dispatch. So the current functionality of post dispatch, which is present in the Kubevela, is working fine. The uh, application, the trade, which whatever the application or whatever the workload trade is getting deployed, it's getting deployed after the post dispatch of the component. But the issue which we face, and that was a requirement from our guidewire team also. So once like the post dispatch, it's getting deployed after the workload is ready, but it is not able to fetch any status of the component. So for its example, like I am deploying a component and there is a post dispatch which create a config map, and that config map value will depend on the number of instance of that component which is running, and that can be dynamic, like it can depend on some external factor. It can run like 5 4. So I want a config map to be like get the status of the workload and then you create a config map. So that feature was not there in the post dispatch logic of the trade. So that feature we implemented it, and along with it we also improved the status message. Like once the post dispatch is getting applied, it will say like I'm waiting for component to be healthy. If the component get failed, it will show like the component get failed. Or the order of post dispatch also, it will always run after the component once the component is fully ready. So for the demo, I'll use this example. So here I'm using an application
One question, Vishal,
which is,
before you go
yes.
forward. So, what essentially you're saying is that as part of post dispatch,
Mhm.
we currently we have some context in config map that may not be accurate to what has been rendered because of the dynamic nature of maybe HP or something? What exactly would cause that to not be right?
Okay, so not like some context. So basically, if any of the context of any workload, so like suppose a component is deploying a workload and that workload context we want to access in trade, it won't allow the application to itself get created at first place. It is basically during the trait evaluation, it will ask like I don't have the context, like whatever the context which will be populated in future. Like consider an example of deployment. So there are some contexts like ready replica, failed replica. So these are the contexts which are not present until the workload is deployed into cluster. And suppose we wanted to access those contexts in our trait, it is not possible as of now.
You mean you want to access it post
The,
deployment or post
uh,
syncing reconciliation instead of post rendering? I'm not
so,
sure I get it.
so what happens is
Yes.
you can mark a trait as post dispatch, which is basically
Uh-huh.
like, hey, wait until after the component is healthy to apply this trait.
Okay,
Which is
so post dispatch is when a component has become completely healthy. It is not just rendered.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So wait until it
Mm.
becomes healthy and then dispatch this trait, which is a
Okay.
very useful feature to have. But the
Mm-hmm.
issue is that the rendering of the trait happened alongside the component. So even though it's
Uh,
waiting until the component is up and running, it doesn't have access to any of the data that the component created because
mm.
at render time that was not yet available. So if so basically if the component if you want to
Not healthy yet.
post dispatch straight to the outputs of the component, you couldn't do that because the rendering would fail saying, hey, I don't have the component outputs in my context.
Got it.
So it's it's
Yeah,
its usefulness was very limited because there was a requirement from internal where they wanted to provision an EFS, and then when the EFS was up,
yes.
they would have a crate that did something with that EFS, but it didn't work because it didn't actually have the capability to get the provisioned EFS from the
Yeah,
component.
I can give some context on that EFS. So we had the internal requirement. So our components are like, let's say it provisions the EFS resource and then the persistent volume within the Kubernetes cluster. The follow-up sequence would be I need a trait that would provision a persistent volume claim. So here, because of the previous nature of post dispatch, the claim, persistent volume claim object would fail stating I'm not able to fetch the status of the persistent volume. So that was the initial problem that we had. And yeah,
But wouldn't that eventually reconcile?
No, because it can't render.
It won't
yes.
declare itself. Okay, got it.
If you
Oh,
refer to context.output.x, it will fail to render entirely. So there was
mhm.
no way to actually even tell it, like, keep trying this until you had the context. It just wasn't ever available.
Got it.
Yeah. So
Understood.
the validating webhook basically we have a health checker where we check the queue rendering part. So it will get failed there and only in the validating webhook logic. So for the demo, I'm using this application. So basically, this application is creating a component of type web service, and then it is applying three traits. So the one is scalar trait, which is by default a default stage, and the other two trait are like custom built-in trait. And for both the trait, the stage is post dispatch. And as Brian was suggesting, like this is the things where it is getting failed. So suppose if I am like I have created this true trait, and as soon as I apply the application, it will go and parse this trait, and then it will find I don't have status field defined anywhere in the parameter or in the output section, and it will fail at the compile time only. So because it isn't find, so for this we have applied the fix. Now what I'll do, like I'll deploy this application. So I'll create both the trait and then apply this application, and then we'll check the Vela status, how it is propagating. Yeah. So right now my web service, since it is downloading this image, so component is not healthy. So both the message it's saying waiting for component to be healthy. Now if we keep on checking the status, yeah, right now if you see like the config mat rate is healthy, this is test healthy, but this is still downloading the image. So overall this component is still not healthy. After few second it will download. So once this is ready, then my whole application got ready. So basically this two trait waits for component, and this one now if I check the number of instance of the deployment which this trait deploys is 3. So basically it is reading the data from the ready replica state. So it's basically if I do uh, see okay, deployment. So these are the status. So basically this status are present once the workload is deployed into the cluster and are ready. So if I want to access any of those this status in my trade, as of now, corresponding to the master branch 10.5, it will fail because it will not found this status variable. But now with this fix, I can access any of this variable and use it in my trade definition, which will be further used in post dispatch phase.
Understood. The assumption is each of those components actually have a proper health status being emitted.
Yes.
Got it. Cool. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions?
No, I'm just gonna flag that this is one of those odd ones where it's simple on paper, but the guys have put in a crazy amount of work to get this to work. The dispatcher logic is quite complex, and there's a lot of stuff has kind of gone into this. So yeah, so
Yeah, kudos.
it's a
That's
really good win because
yeah.
I put my hand to this and I gave up halfway through. So the guys have persisted and got it working. So
Good job, guys. Cool. In the interest of time, should we move on? Or is there more to that demo?
No, that's for post dispatch.
Okay.
oh, thanks for that. Okay, so really quickly, so the problem statement, currently Helm is not really a first-class citizen within the Kubevela world. We don't integrate with it in the same way as popular tools like Flux do, and that means that for anything regarding Helm charts, we need to rely on external tools. And if you look at the Kubevela, add-ons, what's tending to happen is that we have a Flux CD add-on which adds Flux support, and then a huge number of the downstream add-ons depend on that Flux CD add-on being installed in order to be able to use those add-ons. So the Crossplane add-on, for example, depends on you having the Flux CD add-on installed. Obviously, not everybody wants to install Flux. They may be using other tools like Argo, and we don't want to have Flux running alongside it, or there's also a kind of issue where if you already have Flux installed, and we suffer from this internally, if you have Flux installed ready and you install the Flux CD add-on through Kubevela, it kind of has conflicts between the two. And that kind of leads to us not really being able to even use the add-on. Then accompanied with that, we have Kubevela add-ons themselves where we are kind of copy pasting resources. So essentially the Helm chart is created for the workflow. Um, Somebody seems to be rendering that and then converting that into queue, and then that copied queue becomes the add-on, and then between versions of the workflow release and queue trigger release, etc., we have to keep doing that conversion from chart into queue. And I don't think that's always happening. So we're not 100% confident in what's actually contained in those add-ons, and it's also a big burden to have to do that. So it'd be much more efficient if we could just bundle those Kubevela add-ons up as Helm charts and then expose them directly. And that is also kind of a major issue because we want to be able to install our add-ons through some unified charts, but currently we would have to use Flux CD to do that as part of the installation process. And then you kind of got this chicken egg problem where, Kubevela has to install the Flux CD add-on before it can consume its own internal add-ons, and it's just not a good process. So the solution was we would like to be able to have built-in Helm functionality within Kubevela so that you do not need Flux. I think Helm is, a staple of the Kubernetes world, and it makes sense that we integrate better with it. So what we've built out is the new Helm chart component. And this component will directly render within Kubevela, and it will then use the Kubevela dispatch system to actually provision the resources. So essentially, again, this is using QX. And when you call this component, QX will take your values, etc., pass them into a QX function. That QX function uses the Helm SDK to render the chart, and then it passes all that back to Kubevela, and Kubevela can insert that into its outputs, and then Kubevela does the dispatching. The advantage of that is that your Helm charts can now natively dispatch to a multi-cluster setup. So you can specify the Helm chart once and deploy it to your entire landscape of clusters, all without external tooling. It also means that Kubevela is aware of the provisioned resources, and they're under direct control of Kubevela, as opposed to when you use something like Flux, where Kubevela is provisioning the Flux Helm releases, and then it kind of loses its ability to track health at that point because it knows that the Helm release is there, but it doesn't really know what the Helm release did. So with this, we are aware of all the resources, and that means that we can actually configure health status dynamically into the Helm chart, and we can assess the health of the provisioned resources. So we can say type Helm chart, we can give it the usual properties. But if we look at the Argo one where I implemented this, we can also say, hey, I also want to wait for the Argo CD server deployment to become available before considering this chart to be healthy. And I think that's a big game changer here because it means that your Helm charts will actually interact better with the Kubevela workflow system. They will, if you have a workflow with dependencies, it will wait for your Helm charts deployment to be completely finished before moving on to the next one. And that's pretty critical for like multi-cluster orchestration. If you're trying to build, if you're trying to build a platform consisting of many Helm charts, you obviously want to install them in some level of ordering, and this will greatly help with that. The health stuff is it's pretty basic at the moment. You can only do checks on the conditions, but we can expand this in the future to have dynamically assessed queue references, but we need more enhancements to be able to do that, but it's in the backlog. And yeah, let me show you. So if I do Vela up and I have my Helm app running here, which again is going to just provision the Argo CD Helm chart. Once I do this, I should see an application appear, and you can see it's in phase rendering. It's running the workflow, and you can see it's in status deploying because it's using the health status that I passed in to assess this. And it will wait about 20 seconds because that's about how long the Argo CD Helm chart takes to install. And only once the deployment is running should this flick to deployed and mark itself as healthy. And this also means you have continuous, with the new functionality we had in 1.10.4, every few minutes this will reassess the health of your application. And if that Helm chart has gone into an unhealthy state, it will flag your application as unhealthy. And it'll send the appropriate logging and metrics, etc., to your aggregator, and you can respond to that. And I think that's pretty unique functionality to be able to like orchestrate at this level and have such dynamic health status checks across any tooling that I'm aware of. So this should greatly help us to, better adopt Helm charts. And it also means that we can now wrap any Helm chart available in the Kubernetes community in a Kubevela add-on. So essentially, we can like have an infinite number of add-ons much more easily than prior. We would, instead of having to do these kind of awkward conversion processes to create an add-on, a queue add-on, we can just wrap the Helm chart and then just expose the necessary definitions to support that tool. So this should like greatly expand the number of add-ons and the ease of creating them. And also means they don't have to be as maintained because essentially you can just update the version of the Helm chart and it should just, update versus having to manually take it and convert that into queue. So that is that. Any questions?
Yeah, is Helm chart a new component type or was that
Yes.
already there? Oh, it's a new one.
No, so there is a Helm component in Flux, so I didn't want to call it Helm, so I went with Helm chart.
Got it. Okay, cool.
But it is new, yeah.
Yeah, and with that, we inherit everything from components, so depend on, so we can manage kind of the Helm dependency with all the existing Kubevela infrastructure being dependent on workflow and stuff like that.
Exactly. So you can have a workflow that installs, 20 Helm charts in a particular order and it's health checking them in between and passing outputs from, deployments in one Helm chart to, another Helm chart, etc. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Um,
Good.
this has led me down a path of wondering, can we, instead of having to write a controller and CRDs, etc., for add-ons, could an add-on itself be a component so that you can
That
have
that would be very powerful because at that point, because that was one of the issues we've had with add-ons was how to adopt them easily, right? And instead of using the command line as a way to do it, or wrap a command line in a workflow, I think if we could make add-ons for first-class citizens, then that would be a great win.
I think it would be kind of actually game changing because you can now side by side provision all these Kubevela add-ons within an application with
Exactly.
workflows, and you can have Helm charts side by side with it.
Yep.
You
Yep.
can
Yep.
easily wrap Helm charts in add-on, so it's kind of like this infinite level of orchestration and nesting of these kind of popular concepts, and it's all
Yeah.
natively usable within the existing workflow logic.
Yeah, we'll have to be careful around where it could entangle ourselves as a user. But I think it'd be very powerful. We'll have to give a lot more guidance to where it should not be used and why in certain use cases are not the right places. But
Yeah.
exactly, I think it having that power uh, would be game changing. All right. Anybody else have any other questions? Any thoughts?
Just wanted to ask one thing regarding the KubeCon. Anup. So,
Yes.
did anyone mention that they were using standalone workflows without Vela core?
No, we didn't. At least I didn't go into that much of a detail. I don't know, Jerome, are you aware?
Trying to remember, it kind of ring a bell, but I forgot the context. So was it between us or by discussing? Totally. Or
Yeah.
it's possible. No, I think it's me who mentioned it as a solution for a problem.
Okay, all right, sure.
Cool. Anybody else have any topics to discuss?
Quick one. The
Yep.
previous community call, we wanted to work on the 2026 roadmap. We pushed the 2026 roadmap items with 4 milestones like spring, summer, fall, and winter. We
Awesome.
have added the milestones or um, the roadmap items based on the community requirement and most asked features or the common issues. Uh, just want to call out like the milestone would be adjusted based on the community meeting discussions and GitHub issues or any other requirements. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. That is the way we should go. This is dynamic. We are starting with an intent, and we will change as a community helps us. Gives us a feedback on things that are necessary or important for them.
Yeah. For anybody looking for it, it's at /doc/roadmap, or you can get to it from documentation, and then it's just down the bottom here.
Perfect. Cool. If nothing else, have a great day, great evening, great night, wherever you are, and we'll meet for the next community call.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Thank you.